He was a man of power, respected, wealthy, untouchable, or so it seemed. But the moment he stepped into his car that night, everything shifted. A small voice, trembling yet fierce, cut through the silence. "Shut up." It wasn't anger you could ignore, it was pain, sharp and unfiltered. And in that instant, he knew this wasn't about him at all. What he was about to learn would shatter his pride, test his humanity, and reveal a truth far bigger than his fortune. So, why would a little girl dare to silence a man like him? It had been a long day at the top floor of the city's tallest glass tower. Daniel Hayes, a self-made millionaire and CEO of a thriving tech company, was used to moving through life in a bubble of control, chauffeurs, boardrooms, and penthouse views. Success had taught him to expect smooth roads, not sudden detours. That night was no different, or so he thought. He stepped out of his office, the hum of the city wrapping around him like background noise he'd learned to tune out. The polished black sedan waited at the curb, just as it always did. But somewhere, hidden beneath the comfort of his routine, something was shifting. A moment was approaching that no wealth, no status, could prepare him for. Daniel slid into the back seat, the leather still holding the warmth from the sun that had dipped below the skyline. The soft click of the door closing felt final, like the start of another sealed-off journey home. But the air inside wasn't right. It wasn't the quiet hum of the engine or the faint scent of cologne that caught his attention, it was the presence of someone who shouldn't have been there. In the seat opposite him sat a little girl. Maybe 8, maybe 9 years old. Dark skin, hair pulled into 2 braids, eyes burning with a weight far too heavy for her age. She didn't flinch when he looked at her. She didn't fidget. She just stared, unblinking, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment. Before Daniel could speak, she said it. "Shut up." Not loud, not shrill, just a steady command that carried the strange authority of someone who knew she had nothing left to lose. Daniel froze. No one spoke to him like that. Not employees. Not investors. Not even rivals. His first instinct was to demand an explanation, to assert control. But something in her expression stopped him. This wasn't defiance for the sake of it. This was defiance born out of survival. He noticed her small hands trembling slightly, gripping the fabric of her faded jacket. There was dirt on the knees of her jeans, and her sneakers looked like they'd been through months of hard miles. Her breathing was controlled, but her eyes were scanning him, measuring him, deciding if he was worth speaking to at all. The driver, an older man Daniel had known for years, kept his eyes fixed on the road. His silence was unusual. He wasn't making small talk or offering the usual updates about traffic. He was avoiding something. Daniel's mind raced. Who is this girl? How did she get in my car? And why is everyone acting like this is normal? The city blurred past the tinted windows, each passing streetlight flashing across the girl's face like fragments of a story he hadn't been told yet. She finally spoke again, not to explain, but to ask a question that seemed absurd. "Do you even know what happens outside your building?" Her tone wasn't mocking. It was almost mournful. Daniel didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. She went on, her words sharp and precise, like she'd rehearsed them. "Every day you go up there, in your glass box, looking down at the rest of us. You don't see the things they do to people who look like me. You don't hear the things they say. You think your money means you're safe. But you're not. And neither is anyone else." Her voice cracked at the last sentence, and for the first time, Daniel saw it, the fear behind the fire. This wasn't just her story. This was something bigger. Something ongoing. The car slowed at a red light, and that's when Daniel noticed it, 2 police cruisers in the lane beside them. The officers inside weren't looking at the road. They were looking directly into his car. Not at him. At her. The light turned green, but the cruisers didn't move. They stayed there, matching speed, their presence deliberate. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. The girl's gaze dropped to her lap, as if bracing for something inevitable. Daniel felt a strange mix of anger and confusion. Why are they watching her like that? Why is she acting like this is normal? A block later, the cruisers finally fell back, disappearing down a side street. The girl didn't relax. Neither did the driver. Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant about tomorrow's meetings, but for the first time in years, he ignored it. Something was happening here, and he needed to understand. As they crossed into a quieter part of the city, the girl began to tell fragments of her story, not in a straight line, but in pieces. Words like stopped, searched, shoved, slipped out between longer silences. She mentioned names of people Daniel didn't know, places he had never set foot in, and events that had happened blocks from his headquarters but may as well have been a world away. The tension in the car grew heavier with each mile. Daniel realized this wasn't just about one bad night for her. This was about a pattern, a relentless, grinding force pressing down on her life, and the lives of those around her. Every time he tried to piece it together, she would stop, her eyes darting to the windows as if checking for watchers. Finally, as they approached an intersection, the driver spoke for the first time that night, his voice low and urgent, "We're being followed." Daniel turned, and there it was, a black SUV 2 cars behind, moving when they moved, stopping when they stopped. Its headlights glared in the rearview mirror like unblinking eyes. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "They don't like it when we talk to people like you." Daniel's pulse quickened. For the first time in years, he felt unsafe, not because of competition, not because of market crashes, but because he was now tethered to a truth someone didn't want exposed. The driver made an unexpected turn, then another, weaving through narrow streets Daniel didn't recognize. Still, the SUV stayed close. In that moment, Daniel understood, this wasn't just an uncomfortable conversation. This was dangerous. And the real story, the reason this little girl had been put in his car, was about to collide with his life in a way that would leave no part of it untouched. But the worst part? He still didn't know what they were willing to do to keep her silent. The driver's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were pale. The streets around them were narrowing, brick buildings pressing in on both sides, shadows swallowing the corners. Daniel's eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror. The SUV was still there, its headlights a constant reminder that they weren't free, not even for a moment. The little girl sat perfectly still now, her earlier defiance replaced with something colder, heavier. She didn't look scared. She looked resigned. The driver made one final sharp turn into an alley, tires screeching against the cracked pavement. It was a dead end. Daniel's chest tightened. "Why here?" he asked, but the driver didn't answer. The SUV rolled in slowly behind them, blocking the only way out. Doors opened. 2 men stepped out, not in uniforms, but in plain clothes. Yet there was something about the way they moved, the way their eyes locked onto the girl, that told Daniel they didn't need badges to have authority. The girl's breath quickened. She whispered, "Don't say anything. Don't move." Daniel's instinct screamed to demand answers, to push back, but something about her tone told him she'd been through this before. One of the men walked to the driver's side and tapped the glass with his knuckles. The sound echoed in the alley like a warning. The driver rolled the window down halfway. "Step out," the man said flatly. The driver hesitated, then obeyed. Daniel watched as the other man circled the car and opened the rear door. "Come on, kid," he said, not looking at Daniel. The girl didn't move. Now, the man snapped, his voice dropping an octave. Daniel felt something in him break. "What's going on here?" he demanded, leaning forward. The man finally looked at him, cold eyes, expression unreadable. "Not your business." But it was his business now. Every nerve in Daniel's body screamed that if she left with them, she wouldn't be safe. The girl's small hand reached for the door handle, but she paused, glancing at Daniel for the first time since the SUV arrived. Her eyes were asking a question he couldn't quite name, but he knew the answer mattered. Daniel stepped out of the car. The man closest to him shifted his stance, body angled like he was preparing for a fight. "Sir, I'm telling you, stay out of this." Daniel didn't move. "If you're taking her, I want to know why." The alley seemed to shrink. The SUV idled behind them, its engine growling like some caged animal. The air was thick, heavy with unspoken threats. The second man spoke this time, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "She's a runaway. We're bringing her back where she belongs." The girl's sharp inhale cut through the lie. "You're not taking me back there," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Daniel's heart pounded. "Back where?" he asked, but she didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any explanation. One of the men stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. That was the breaking point. Daniel moved without thinking, stepping between them. "You're not touching her until I know who you are and where you're taking her." The man's jaw tightened. "You think your money matters here?" Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. "I think she matters here." The man's eyes narrowed, and in that instant, Daniel realized how dangerous this was. No one was filming. No one was watching. This was the kind of place where things happened in silence, and stayed that way. The grip on the girl's shoulder tightened. She flinched, and Daniel's instincts overrode his fear. He reached for her, pulling her toward him. The reaction was immediate. The first man shoved Daniel back, hard enough to send him stumbling into the side of the car. Pain shot through his ribs. The girl was crying now, not loudly, but the kind of silent tears that come when you know no one is coming to help. And then, a sound broke through the alley. Sirens. Faint at first, but growing louder. The two men froze, their eyes darting toward the street. "Time's up," the driver said from behind them, his phone still in his hand. He'd called someone. The men exchanged a look, then released the girl. Without another word, they climbed back into the SUV and reversed out of the alley, disappearing into the night as quickly as they'd appeared. The girl stood in the middle of the alley, shaking, her small frame dwarfed by the looming buildings. Daniel wanted to tell her it was over, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. This was just one night. One encounter. But for her, for countless others, this was life. And as the wail of sirens grew closer, Daniel realized something that would haunt him. He had almost let her disappear. The sirens grew louder until the alley was washed in red and blue light. Uniformed officers stepped out, scanning the scene, their questions quick and direct. The two men were already gone, but their presence still lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. The little girl stood close to Daniel, her small hand clutching the edge of his jacket. She wasn't looking at the officers. She wasn't looking at anyone. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far away, on something only she could see. A memory she couldn't erase. Daniel answered what questions he could, but the truth was, he still didn't know everything. He didn't know what those men had wanted, where they had planned to take her, or what she had endured before stepping into his car. But he knew enough to understand this wasn't a one-time event. This was part of a chain, a long, unbroken chain of fear and survival that stretched far beyond this single night. The officers took her statement quietly, then led her toward a patrol car. She didn't turn back to look at Daniel. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe looking back meant risking hope. When the alley finally emptied, Daniel remained there, the hum of the city resuming as if nothing had happened. His ribs ached where he'd been shoved, but the deeper wound was invisible. He had built his life believing he could control his world, that success insulated you from chaos. But tonight had stripped that illusion away. Over the next days, Daniel tried to return to his normal routine, meetings, calls, business deals, but the image of her face wouldn't leave him. The fire in her eyes when she told him to shut up. The quiet resignation when the SUV arrived. The trembling relief when the sirens came. He began to ask questions he had never thought to ask. Questions about the neighborhoods just blocks away from his office. Questions about who was protected and who was watched. Questions about how a child could carry so much fear and still stand her ground. And with each answer, he felt the same uncomfortable truth settle deeper. What he saw that night was not rare. It was reality for millions. Racism isn't always a headline or a viral video. Sometimes it's an alley. A quiet street. A conversation no one hears. It's the way people look, or don't look, at a child based solely on the color of her skin. It's the silence that allows injustice to survive. Daniel realized that doing nothing was a choice. And that choice, repeated enough times by enough people, is exactly what keeps the chain unbroken. The little girl's story didn't end that night. Neither did the story of countless others like her. But maybe, just maybe, if more people saw, listened, and acted, the chain could be broken. Because this isn't about wealth, or power, or position. It's about humanity. So the question isn't if these stories will keep happening. The question is, how many more before we finally refuse to look away?